These are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to this webinar about Embase. My name is Anne-Marie and I'm your host today, and I'm here with our Embase expert Ian Crowlesmith, who will be talking to you in just a couple of moments. Ian has been with Embase for over 30 years and is currently Senior Product Manager for Content Development. During this period he has played a major role in developing the tools available in Embase for searching for evidence. Today Ian's going to focus on case studies, highlighting the ways in which different levels of evidence can be identified in Embase. And he'll show you a number of techniques which can help you optimize your searches when you're carrying out a systematic review. Before we get started, I'd just very briefly like to put Embase into context. Embase is developed and maintained by Elsevier. And here you see Embase serving the needs in the clinical area, academic and corporate. And we also have Pharmapendium, which gives searchable access to all FDA and EMA approval documentation. And moving into the preclinical stage, we have Reaxis, our chemistry workflow tool, and our new addition, Reaxis Medicinal Chemistry. In the discovery and the biology space, we have Pathway Studio and our target identification tool, Target Insights. Underlying this, you'll see Cyber Science Direct, which provides full text access to over 10 million journal articles, and of course is continuously looking for new and novel ways to enable further understanding of the scientific literature. And also Cyber Scopus is our all science database. Quosa is our management tool, which we are now looking for more opportunities for interoperability with Embase. So one more thing before I hand over to Ian, and that's a couple of need-to-knows. So we will be placing the webinar slides and recording online, so you can listen to it again in your own time, and indeed forward to any of your colleagues who are not able to make the session today. You can send us your questions during the session by using the chat or ask a question function, and we'll have some time at the end for questions, which we'll try to answer as many as possible throughout the webinar. Any questions we don't get to, Ian will kindly provide an answer in a document which we'll also send out to you after the webinar. If you wish to have a full screen view, please click on the red arrow. Your control panel will be hidden, and click again to see your control panel. And now I would like to hand over to Ian to get us started.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne-Marie. Today's agenda is searching for evidence on Embase, and I'd like to do that primarily with 4 case studies in the areas illustrated here: drugs and diseases, diagnostic tests, medical devices, and process of care. And in the course of that, we'll be focusing primarily on levels of evidence, but with just a few words on goals and methods and on other search tips. And I'd like to mention that last October I gave a more comprehensive webinar about evidence-based medicine on Embase, and you can find that on our info site. I think Anne-Marie will mention that at the end of the webinar, where you can find that. So goals and methods. The intention in this webinar is to help you find the highest quality of evidence available with the best balance of sensitivity and specificity. And the methods which I'll be using to illustrate this are a systematic search of the literature using predefined inclusion and exclusion criteria as used by PICO. What I won't be talking about is comparison with multiple data sources such as Medline, which those of you who are interested in carrying out systematic reviews will of course be interested in extending searches to other sources for the most comprehensive retrieval possible. And I won't be talking about analytical methods for actually evaluating the evidence. Just a reminder about PICO, because I'll be touching on this in the course of this webinar. P for patient, I for intervention, C for comparison, O for outcome. Now, and this is just to point out the application of PICO is a little different for diagnostic studies, as you can see here, whereas with therapy you will have an intervention, with a diagnostic study you will have a diagnostic test. And this plays out as well in the actual tests which are reported in the literature, so that, for example, in diagnostic test, it will be a single patient group where you'll be doing the index test and comparing that with a reference standard. Now, this slide is taken from the webinar in October, where I touched on levels of evidence already and illustrated various evidence-based medicine relevant sources and their approach to levels of evidence. But on Embase, what I'd like to do now is to talk about different approaches to levels of evidence. And I'm going to talk a little bit about check tags, study types, topic terms, and reviews of the evidence. You can find a lot of this information also summarized on our Embase indexing guide, which is on the info site. First of all, check tags. Check tags are index terms which have scope notes. I've talked before at the previous webinar about randomized controlled trials, controlled clinical trials, and clinical trials mentioned here at the top. But today I'd like to focus your attention also on 3 other check tags, which are slightly, which we don't tend to talk about all that much, and I think that they may be useful to you. They're major clinical study, which reports on original items with more than 50 patients, clinical article reporting clinical work on 5 to 50 patients, and case reports on up to 4 individual cases. And these may be useful when reviewing levels of evidence. We'll see that in a moment. Now, taking a lead from the triangle of evidence that we saw just a couple of slides back, you can see here a number of study types which are represented by M3 terms that are not check tags, such as case control study, cohort analysis, and so on. And if you, as we will be doing shortly, use the filters in the Embase interface, you will see many of these terms represented among the study type filters. Where these come from is M3. If you look in M3, you will find, among other terms, clinical study, and listed as narrower terms under clinical study, the terms that we've just been seeing in the filters. Now, what I haven't mentioned yet are the topic terms. Topic terms, which are, as you can see, asterisks here, are terms with topic in brackets after them. There are 10 of them, and they were introduced in M3 in 2011 in order to differentiate between studies in which trials are reported in the actual study and studies where they are only topics. So, for example, we have a clinical trial topic for an article in which might be a letter to the editor, for example, which talks about clinical trials, whereas an actual clinical trial that is reported would be indexed with clinical trials since 2011. And finally, terms in this area which are focused on reviewing evidence. We've got, of course, systematic review and meta-analysis. And it might be interesting if you're making systematic reviews to see other systematic reviews or meta-analyses which have reported on the topic that you were searching in the past. These terms also have related topic terms, as we've just seen. And finally, just to mention that it may be of interest for some purposes to have a look at practice guidelines, and you can also find that in M3. Okay, I'd like to move on to the case studies. As I mentioned, there are 4 different areas. The search questions are listed here, and I believe, Anne-Marie, that you would like to send out a short questionnaire to see which ones we can address first.
Absolutely. So thanks, Ian. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a poll. So we'd love to hear from you as to what you find most interesting, and Ian will then use your order of preference for going through the case studies. If we have time, indeed, for all 4, then that's great. But otherwise, at least then we make sure that we focus on the ones that are most interesting. So, without further ado, let me launch the poll for you. So you'll see here, as you saw in Ian's slides, we have case study, drugs and diseases, diagnostic tests, medical devices, and process of care. So if you would like to vote on those. And I can then pass over the results to Ian. So we'll just give you a couple of more, just another minute for that. Excellent. Okay, I don't see any more movement. Okay, last chance to cast your vote and have your say in the case study poll. All right, I'm going to okay. So let me share that. So drugs and diseases was by far the most popular, Ian, with 69%. Second was process of care. And then I think you could take your pick between medical devices, was slightly more popular than diagnostic tests.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll start
let me
with
hide that one. So the screen is now back with you, Ian. So you got that, the drugs and diseases, process of care, medical devices. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll move on to, let me just go to the current slide, to drugs and diseases. I've just illustrated here the PICO approach to this particular search question. So we're looking at the depression in children and how that would be treated. Treated with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and looking at control studies and alternatives, and in particular outcomes we were interested in risk of suicide. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking at levels of evidence. I'll just jump into Embase. Hopefully you can see the Embase screen now. Okay. Now the first thing I'd like to do is have a look in Emtree to see the way in which depression is represented. I'll click on depression here. And you can see that depression is an explosion term. That's the appropriate term that we want to use. And what I'd like to do here is to take this query to disease search, where I will identify the disease subheading drug therapy. In this way, you can see that the explosion search has been selected here. And then I'm also interested in identifying children. So we'll move on down here. Before I actually do that, I'd just like to point out, because I won't be necessarily illustrating it, we do have an advanced limit that you can have a look at Cochrane reviews, randomized control trials, systematic reviews, and so on. But we'll be approaching that in a slightly different way. But what I want to do now is to have a look at age groups down the bottom. And I'm going to select child and adolescents. And then search on that. And then I have a basic search on depression in children. The next thing I'd like to have a look at is the SSRIs. Now, since I'm not quite sure exactly how that might be represented, I'm just going to type in SSRI. There are some acronyms in Emtree if they're fairly unambiguous, and we hope that this is unambiguous, and indeed it is. We find that serotonin uptake inhibitor is the term that we want. There are many specific inhibitors listed here, and I'm going to carry out simply an explosion search by clicking on the number of records here, and then combine those two. So these are the articles about depression in children which are treated by serotonin uptake inhibitors. I could have applied the drug therapy subheading to serotonin uptake inhibitor as well, but I've already done that with depression. So that should be okay. And the final thing we want is suicide. So go back into Emtree. You can see that suicide is a regular term. I'm going to select that. And finally, I want to combine numbers 3 and 4. So there are 172 records here. And what I want to show you is that if we open up study type here, all the terms that we have been looking at, you can find listed here if they're relevant to this particular search. So that, for example, you can find systematic reviews here. There are 5 of those. Meta-analyses, there are 4 of them. Randomized controlled trials, here 7, and controlled clinical trials. But there are also, as well as clinical trial, there's major clinical studies. You'll recall those are studies with 50 or more patients, and case reports with up to 4 patients. There are 13 of those. There are no clinical articles in this particular search. So what I'm trying to show you here is that by looking at this range of study types, you can get an idea of the range of evidence that is available and decide what it is that you want to search on to focus. I'm not going to be looking at individual articles. That's something that obviously you can do any time that you are carrying out an actual systematic review. So I'll leave this one here for now, and I think move on to the next one, which is Anne-Marie?
The process of care?
That's the process of care.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just going to delete those searches. And just to remind ourselves, this is the question about process of care. And the question is, how does the application of telemedicine for diabetes compare with implementation for other diseases? Have there been any significant updates since the last Cochrane review in 2007? So I'll be having a look at diabetes. The intervention is telemedicine. And outcomes, I'll be looking in particular for systematic reviews, meta-analyses, randomized controlled trials. So let's begin again with Emtree. And I'll type in telemedicine here. Now what you can see is that telemedicine is an explosion term listing all kinds of specific categories of telemedicine. But there's actually a term up here, telehealth, which is slightly broader. That includes nursing as well. So I think that to answer this, it would be interesting to take telehealth as the term rather than telemedicine itself. Now the question is, one of the questions is, how does the telemedicine with diabetes compared with other diseases? Now, if we open up the disease filter, you can have a look at the way in which all of the results on telemedicine are distributed between the different diseases on Emtree. Diabetes mellitus is here at the top. That's one of the reasons that I chose it for this particular example. But you can see many other disease types listed here. So clearly telemedicine is particularly interesting for diabetes. So I'm just going to close that. And actually I'm not going to close it. I'm going to open it and then select diabetes. And you can see that 548 of these telehealth articles are about diabetes mellitus. Now, since we want to really focus on the articles about diabetes, you can see this first example seems likely to be about something a little bit different. It seems appropriate to actually search diabetes mellitus as a major term. Now, we don't have to research it. We can simply edit this search, and with a little bit of experience, you will know that MJ is the acronym for major terms. We check that we haven't made a mistake just in typing it, and then we accept that. And there are 292 articles on telehealth with diabetes mellitus as a major term. And you can see the first couple of articles here have diabetes listed in the title. Now, we can then copy this search to advanced search. And the reason I want to do that actually is to pick up this evidence-based medicine advanced limit that we looked at before and select on Cochrane review. Now, in the question, I indicated there was a Cochrane review in 2007 because I obviously did this in preparation. But in doing this, you could confirm to yourself when a Cochrane review has last been written, and there it is in 2007. What we can also do, we can come back to this diabetes mellitus search, number 2, and we can repeat what we just did before and have a look at systematic reviews. Carry that out. And you can see there are 5 systematic reviews, 5 articles indexed with systematic review. And there's one in 2012, 2010, 2009, 2009, and 2007. So at least 4 of them apparently have been written after the Cochrane review was written. So those might be interesting to look at if you want to update your knowledge on this particular topic. Finally, we'll just go back again to the diabetes mellitus search, and instead of looking at advanced search, I'm just going to open up the study type. So you could have done it in this way to begin with. Systematic reviews actually are not shown here because there are only 5 of those, and you can see the last term actually listed here has 6 hits. So we don't go beyond, let's say, 1 screen's worth. But if we want to have a look at randomized controlled trials, we can find those here, and then we can do that search as well. So there are various ways in selecting on these levels of evidence, either going through the study type or going through the evidence-based limits as I illustrated just now. Okay. That brings this particular example to a close. How are we doing for time?
It's 24 minutes past, Ian, so perhaps one more.
Okay.
Can we fit in the medical device? Was the slightly more popular than the diagnostic test.
Okay, we'll have a look at that one.
Okay, that would be great.
And then we'll see if there are any questions, I guess.
Yes, and just a reminder to all of you, we have a few questions coming in, but please do make sure to use the question function, and Ian will have time for your questions at the end. And like we said, if there's more than we can answer just now, then we will make sure we get back to you. But we'd love to hear as many and answer as many of your questions in this session as possible.
Okay, and I'd also like to mention that if we don't get to the 4th case, you will be able to see that in the PowerPoint, which was circulated after this webinar. So this is the medical device question. What are the pros and cons for metal-on-metal hip implants versus other types of hip implant in different patient groups? Here again is the PICO representation of this. Patients are humans. the intervention is metal-on-metal hip prostheses. We want to look for comparison studies and possibly also look at treatment outcome. That's an example that I've included in this case. So we'll come back to Embase. And again, we look at entry. You can type one term, one word, or many words in order to identify the terms of interest. Here is hip prosthesis. And you can see that hip prosthesis is an explosion term with a bunch of narrower terms. And I'll select that. And the next thing is to have a look at metal hip prostheses. And in order to do that, I'll do that in a slightly different way. I'll go to Quick Search, and I'll start typing here. And you can see that when you do that, we have an autocomplete function which indicates terms which have been indexed in Embase, and including metal-on-metal joint prostheses, which says use metal-on-metal joint prosthesis. If you had a look at that in Emtree, you would see it was introduced in 2013, so that's not a handy term to use actually if you want to have a result set going back further. If we click on this possibility, there are apparently no records there, so we'll skip that option. And what I will instead do is I will click off extensive search, and I'm going to search this in free text because I found that that's a pretty effective way of searching this concept. You see that from item number 2 it's sometimes abbreviated to MOM, but generally the articles are about metal-on-metal hip prosthesis, and we can combine those two in this way. And there are 984 hits. Now, what we are interested in is in comparative studies. We haven't looked at those before, but if we open up the filters, you can see there's an option for a comparative study here, and there's also inter-method comparison. You can see that of the 984 hits, there's a quite significant number which have been indexed by one or the other. So let's carry out a filter using those two searches. And you can see there's 127 results. And perhaps it would also be interesting to have a look and see what it would, how it would be if we looked for comparison in free text. An easy way to do that is simply to copy this search we already have to advanced search and then just to edit it. And we're looking for articles about comparison or comparative. And of course, this is a very unspecific search, where the fact that a comparison has been selected in free text means that the indexing has been included in that search. If we wanted to see how many of those articles would be present in abstract and title only, we could easily have a look at that simply by restricting with the field labels for title and abstract in this way. So we have a range of ways for looking at comparative studies. What I'm going to first of all do, however, is look at treatment outcome. And in order to do that, I'll also go into Quick Search. You you can see the treatment outcome is a term. I'll leave extensive search on. The result of that is that treatment outcome is searched within Emtree, but also as a free text term. So that's the most general possible search there. And let's combine the treatment outcome with the most general comparison study. That's this one here. Combine using and. And you can see there's 111 results, which are about metal-on-metal hip prostheses, which have to do with comparison and where treatment outcome is mentioned. And once again, we'll open up study type. And we can review and then select the levels of evidence. There are major clinical studies here. 42 of these are studies with 50 or more patients. That's interesting information. So it's a topic where there are many studies involving a lot of patients. And you can see here there are clinical articles. Those are articles with 5 to 50 patients. There are 2 case reports listed down here. And once again, some randomized controlled trials, controlled clinical trials, and systematic reviews. So there's a lot of information here that you can look at if you're interested in preparing systematic reviews on this topic. So what I'd like to do just finally before moving on to questions is to show you, I'll come back to presentation. As a summary, that when you search for evidence on Embase, the results can always be summarized according to the levels of evidence available. And if you take the 4 searches that I prepared, and for hip prostheses I divided that into 2, one with treatment outcome and one simply with the comparisons, and then have a look and see how many of the searches have been identified as systematic reviews, meta-analyses, randomized controlled trials, controlled clinical trials, major clinical study, clinical article and case reports. So these last 3 are the ones which differentiate between different numbers of patients in the study. You can see that there is there are different patterns for each of these search topics, and this may be an interesting way for you to get a view of how you want to proceed, whether you want to focus, for example, only on the studies with the highest levels of evidence, for example, the randomized controlled trials, or whether you also want to look for some of them at the case reports. If there are many case reports, you might want to review those, even though the level of evidence is lower. So,
questions?
Questions.
Absolutely. We have some questions, Ian. And a question that we received quite early on, I think it was in your first search. We had someone asking, if we keep Medline checked for the search, will it capture everything in Medline too? So just a couple of words, maybe, yeah, not to get too bogged down in the Medline, the mesh Emtree.
If we keep Medline checked?
Yes, so this was in your advanced search form, I would imagine, and you have Embase and Medline checked, yeah? Okay.
So let's take this search here and let's pick up the hip prosthesis. This is the advanced search form, and we have records from Embase, Embase Classic, and Medline here.
Yes.
So if they're all checked, then the whole database is searched. But let's have a look and see what happens if we remove Embase Classic and Embase, and we leave only Medline. What you then get is a list of all of the articles which are deduplicated on embase.com with Medline, or which have been licensed from Medline and actually Medline unique items. So if we have a look at the results there, you can see that these first 4 are listed as Medline. So at this point on Embase, they're Medline unique items, which means we've licensed them from Medline, and they have not indexed them ourselves. just go a little bit further. All of these ones are examples of that. If we want to have a look at articles which are represented both on Medline, but also we have indexed ourselves, what we can do is we can edit that, and we can say, and Embase. So in this case, the Embase limit means that we have indexed them ourselves. And you can see in these cases that both Embase and Medline are listed here. And what that means is that the indexing comes from Embase. This is the indexing which has been done by the Embase indexers. Whereas for the Medline items that we just saw, which I'll just show you once again, I'll just re-edit that to focus on the Medline items and do that fairly quickly. For these records, the index terms are derived from the Medline records, and they're translated to the Emtree preferred terms in order to be able to represent them in embase.com.
Yeah. So I hope that answered your question sufficiently. Of course, if you have more questions on that topic, let us know. Another question, how does the diabetes telehealth compare with other diseases? Is the filter representation of diseases the only method? That one might take a little bit of thought.
Okay, let's type in telehealth again. So we'll come to a quick search and telehealth as an explosion term. Now, we had a look at the diseases here. This is simply a quick way to identify the highest ranked diseases in this particular set. But of course, you don't have to do it this way. What you can do is you completely separately go into Emtree, and if we browse by facet, we can see there's a facet on diseases here. We can look at physical diseases. We could also look at mental diseases. And then we have to decide how we want to look at them. So, for example, by etiology and pathogenesis. Perhaps not that, actually. Let's go by anatomical structure. Okay. So here there's a bunch of different disease areas. So you can decide what is important to you. So that, for example, if we're interested in skin diseases, we can open these up, and we can do a selection on skin diseases and then simply combine those two. So there are 666 on skin diseases. Let's see in the original set if that was represented. Of course, this is an explosion term on skin diseases, whereas these disease terms listed in the filter are individual skin diseases, so they may or may not come up here. But there is the term skin disease itself actually has been indexed 191 times, and as we've seen, there are probably more. In fact, there's a total of 666 if you look at all skin diseases. So there are definitely different ways of doing this.
Yes, yes. Thanks, Ian. And let me find, because there's a couple of questions here on finding the terminology, like Ian used with the major focus. Ian knew to use MJ there, and a couple of you were asking how indeed would you know how to do that, and I'll just quickly say, if you can point towards help, Ian, that we do give some guidance here, so you can find the syntax in help on the search hints, and we have command line syntax, for example, at the top there, and this will break down some of the syntax for you. And we have the non-alphanumeric characters, so Ian used the question mark, for example. And there's something very weird with the help that I'm just seeing now on Ian's screen. If it looks the same for you.
Yes, we need to have a look at that.
Yes, we will.
But you can see the major index term is listed here.
Exactly. So I just wanted to quickly give you that information. There was another one, Ian.
Can I just, before you go on to that, just mention that if you're not sure about that, you can go to advanced search, and you can limit a search to major focus here, and then the MJ tag will be indexed for you. You don't have to know it in order to be able to do that.
Indeed.
Once you've done it a few times, you'll know it, and you'll be able to type it in directly.
Yeah. But I just wanted to catch a couple of those questions with the help. Okay. There was another question as well. Ian used dashes between the words, and someone asked about quotation marks. And yes, of course, you can use quotation marks as well.
As you can see here in the example, the quotation mark is the way it's represented. So if I just look at this particular term, oops. Cancer gene therapy. I'll do that as a descriptor term. I know that that's a DE. And then you get a particular result. This is an explosion. Oh, it's an explosion and a major, the way that I've selected it. Now, if we come back to advanced search again, and we do it in this way, then we get, in principle, exactly the same result. And then, of course, I have to edit it after the fact to add in major in order to be able to compare it directly. And you can see that in the representation, the hyphens are always replaced by quotes. You can use single quotes or you can use double quotes, not mixed, either one or the other. But the hyphens I personally find easy to type.
Yep. That was a good observation from our attendee. There's a question here, and I'm not sure if we do now have time, but maybe good to raise and let you know that we have indeed received your question. If there's time, could you speak about tips for when you need to research the role of a surgical procedure or process? For example, if you wanted to review articles regarding the use of image-guided surgery. Do you want to cover that now, Ian?
Well, just quickly, but these kinds of questions, image-guided surgery,
that's the one,
I have no idea offhand which of the 60,000 odd entry terms that might be represented by. I'm just going to type image. Now, we've got here, for example, image-guided biopsy, image-guided radiotherapy, and various other options. Let's go to image-guided biopsy and see where that sits in entry. You can see it's a narrower term of biopsy technique. It's not apparently a narrower term of any surgery as such. So I don't know whether this was what this particular questioner was interested in, but this is the way that I would look around entry. It's just pick out an individual word which seems rather unique for this concept and just see how it's represented. What you can, of course, do is you can look at these records, you can open them up, and then have a look, just view the indexing, or you can type some title words which you think might be useful, representative of your search, and then have a look at the indexing of those articles.
Yeah, I find a review of the records myself a good way to figure out how the community is talking about these particular subjects. So we had a question here, Ian, on the Embase search engine. Does it use semantic search methods? And Quirtle is mentioned here, which interestingly enough, I read an article comparing PubMed to Quirtle this week, but I think we'll come back to that one.
Okay.
Very quickly, just before we wrap up, would a given article be tagged in two study types, for example, randomized clinical trial and major clinical study, or these two are mutually exclusive?
No, those two are not mutually exclusive. Some of them are, so that we wouldn't now want to have randomized control trial and controlled clinical trial at the same time. But if we look at, let's come back to session results. So let's do randomized controlled trial. I'll limit it directly in this way. Just have a look at that. And then a different way of preparing a search. Major clinical study. There's the quote I'm typing in there. Type that. You can see major clinical study has been indexed for practically 10% of the entire database. So maybe I should have emphasized that. You know, something to really keep in mind if you want to identify important studies. Combine those two. And you'll find that a third of the randomized controlled trials are actually identified as major clinical studies in Embase. So they're absolutely not mutually exclusive.
And you have proven it.
Thank you.
So Ian, would you mind moving just quickly to the last slide?
Okay.
We have, alas, run out of time. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all your questions. There are many more excellent questions here, and we're very grateful. Thank you for all these questions, which we will answer, like we said, and send to you by email after this. You'll also receive a link to the slides and the recording. Do not fear. You'll be able to refer to these slides later in pieces that you maybe want to follow up on. Please do so. We'd love to hear from you. And feel free to pass this on, as you said, to any colleagues who weren't able to join today. Also, we have our customer support page, which you'll see the URL here. Here we have videos, we have guides, and various things that will help you with using Embase. And our next Embase webinar is on May 29. This is an introduction. So if you have colleagues who are new to Embase, then by all means you'll find the webinar page on the URL above, and you can pass it on to your colleagues. And we hope to see you at future webinars. We have an adverse events webinar coming up later in the year, and just keep an eye on our webinar page. Also, please give us your feedback at the end. We would love to keep improving and finding out what you find interesting and useful. So there'll be a survey popping up just as we close the webinar, and if you have a couple of minutes to fill that in, that would be great. Thank you, Ian, for all the information that you shared with us today, and thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.